Now we'll be talking about the most important thing, that is types of grids. So we talked about the basic reconstruction, basic formation of a grid, basic framework of a grid. But after the first grid came into place, there were many modifications that were done. So we'll be talking about the basic grid and then we'll be going towards the modified grid. So this is the first one. Again, pardon my poor drawing. What I'm showing here is basically a grid. These black colored things, whatever you can see, are lead strips. They are lead strips which are placed parallel to each other. Now, when I'm using it, let us just assume that this yellow colored thing is the incident radiation. So you can see that a large amount of this incident radiation is being blocked. It is going to be blocked at the periphery, which is something which is called as grid cutoff. I'll be talking about grid cutoff later on. But this type of a grid, when you have arrangement of lead strips which are parallel to each other, this type of an arrangement is called by the name of parallel grid. Parallel grid. Fine. So this is parallel grid, and once we keep two parallel grids one above the other and we just twist their directions, I mean we are keeping that in perpendicular direction. So this is in one direction, here the lead strips are in one direction, here the lead strips are in a cross direction. So there is just a formation of a matrix like picture. So this type of a grid where you're just crossing the direction of the grids is called by the name of cross grids. Cross grids. Now you can ask me, sir, what is the difference between the parallel grid and the cross grids as far as the functioning is concerned? So here you can see that these grids are just filtering off radiation once in a go. But when I'm using cross grids, so radiation will be filtered here and the filter radiation is going to pass here. So now what we are doing is we are reforming, we are re-strengthening the grid architectural framework. So the grid now would have double the capacity to remove the scatter radiation as compared to what we could have attained if we would have used only a parallel grid. Since now we're having two grids which are placed one above the other, so if some amount of scatter radiation escapes from here, then the lower grid, which is actually in a perpendicular direction, will block it. So this will result in an enhanced removal or enhanced filtration of the beam. But the problem is still the same. If you keep on increasing the number of grids one above the other, you're obviously going to decrease the incident radiation, the primary radiation as well, resulting in an increased patient dose. Now, a very important thing which I was talking about is the grid cutoff, which I've been saying again and again. So this is the basic framework of a grid. So these yellow lines, as you can see here, they represent nothing but they represent the lead strips. So these lead strips are placed parallel to each other in case of a parallel grid as well as in the case of cross grids. So when we talk about the radiation source, let's suppose this is the radiation source, and this radiation source is also known by the name of convergence line. And what do we see here? We see here that the radiation is actually moving in a direction in a fan-shaped manner, which is extending from the central part, or which is basically the source of the radiation. Now, the central radiation, as you can see, it can pass through the grid because it's almost parallel to the lead strips. But when we go towards the periphery of the grid, this particular radiation becomes more oblique. And as a result, even the parallel or the primary radiation which is placed peripherally is going to be blocked by the grid. This peripheral radiation is going to be blocked by the grid, and this is called by the name of, this phenomena is called by the name of grid cut off. And this is a major problem when you're using a parallel grid or a cross grid. So what will happen once we use this type of a parallel grid? The center part will be definitely denser, the central part of the X-ray, but the periphery would be much lighter as compared to the center because of cutoff. So to circumvent this problem of grid cutoff, I should say counter the issue of grid cutoff, we came up with a different type of grid which was called as focused grids. So what do you mean by focused grids? In focused grids, the central part of the grid usually contains the lead strips which are almost parallel. And when we go towards the periphery, look at the direction, look at the orientation of the lead strips. The orientation of the lead strips also becomes slanted or oblique. This is done specifically to align them with the radiation or the X-rays which are extending along the periphery of the grid. The direction of these primary radiation is also going to be oblique, and it is going to conform to this oblique shape of the radio opaque material which is kept along the peripheral aspect of the grid. Now the point from where this particular radiation starts to travel is called as a convergence line. And the distance between this convergence lines up to the surface of the grid is called as grid radius. So grid radius is nothing but it is basically in majority of the cases kept around 100 to 180 centimeters. Now what will happen if we keep the grid beyond this particular radius? You can see they are basically traveling in this direction in such a way that they are aligned with the obliquity of the grid or the obliquity of the radio opaque material. But so what will happen if we keep this source very close to the grid or very far from the grid? If we keep it very close or very far from the grid, that is, we move it out of focus, it will result in disalignment between the incident radiation and the oblique angle of the radio opaque strips of light. As a result, there would be a significant amount of grid cutoff. How does this occur? We'll be talking about that later on. So the main thing is the grid strips are parallel to the X-ray beam in cases of what grids? In cases of parallel grid. Parallel grid. So the target needs to be placed at the center of the imaginary circle. Now what is this imaginary circle? This imaginary circle refers to nothing but the grid radius. So this grid radius is going to be this particular distance. So the grid has to be placed at the level of grid radius. If I'm going to place it somewhere here that is beyond the grid radius, there's going to be a definite signal loss or grid cut off.